So we're very, very fortunate to have Jamie Bolling here, who's the Executive Director of the European Network for Independent Living, which is the premier European body that advocates for, propagates and agitates politically to secure a right of independent living and being included in the community, plus the necessary changes that are needed to make that happen, particularly with respect to service delivery. So I hand you over without further ado to Jamie Bolling.
Hello everybody, and thank you very much. Ina's very honored, and it's a pleasure to be here today. How do we go with this? The title of mine is Why a New Model of Services is So Important for Independent Living. Just very quickly myself, 3 passports, 2 kids, and 1 passionate drive. I talk about that I am Swiss, Swedish, and American. Why 3 nationalities? That's a long story. But when you're talking about poverty and working internationally, one of the things that I've seen is no matter what the country is, whether it's Sweden, the US, or an African country, people with disability, we share some things in common. One, we're among the poorest of the poor in that country. We have the lowest level of education and the highest level of unemployment, things that Bjorn touched upon. When I talk about my 2 kids who are now almost 30 and 27, so it's not their kids, but when I had my accident 20 years ago, the oldest one came in a couple of days after and put her hands on her hip and said, "Mom, get out of that bed and come home and take care of us." And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to do that as soon as possible. I need to get into a wheelchair." A wheelchair? Never are you allowed to sit in a wheelchair. They were so already indoctrinated what this means to having mothers sitting in a wheelchair. What kind of prejudice do we all have when it comes to people with disabilities? I became aware of my own when I was going to take the special transport the first day to go from the hospital to my home. And it was like, I don't want to sit in that. That's what they used to take the people to the shelter workshop. And I made myself as little as possible in this great big truck until I realized, what am I doing? What are the prejudices that I have in my mind and my body? And what kind of prejudices do we have when we're making policies and services for people with disabilities? So my passionate drive is for human rights, democracy, full participation of people with disabilities, which I've been working for 20, I've had my accident 20 years, I've been active 18. Even living in Sweden, which is a fantastic country, I was lucky to have my accident in Sweden, I usually say, because it was a country with good social policy and good implementation of social policies. A lot of countries have good policies, but then again, one thing is having them on paper, and another one is the implementation of these policies. But through the Sweden's legislation, which is a civil right for personal assistance, I'm here today, I think, because I was able to live an active life since my accident. So, just a summary quickly, I'll be talking about what's independent living, or ENIL, independent living, and why a new model. Let's see, am I going? Yeah, okay. So, European Network on Independent Living, it's a human rights organization, the rights for people with disability. We're not a diagnosed organization, it's an organization that works for autonomy and self-respect. It's a European-wide network from Bulgaria to Iceland. We have members from the Scandinavian countries to Cyprus, Greece, the southern part of Europe, all across Europe. It's a forum for the independent living organizations, but also for our non-disability allies that want to make sure we do have independent living. Cross-disability, as I said. It started in Strasbourg in 1989 with 80 persons coming to Strasbourg for a conference on personal assistance, one of our major issues. Why? Because with personal assistance we can be active in society and have active citizenship, what we're talking about today. As of 2003, we have what we call the Strasbourg Freedom Drive. It's an event every other year where we come to Strasbourg, we march the streets to the Parliament with our demands, and for our demands for personal assistance and for other issues. It's also an event where we have conferences. It's a time for us to meet and lobby the European Parliament, the members of the European Parliament. This is one picture from this year's Freedom Drive. We had it just in September, where it says, institution is the worst solution. It was a Slovenian group, and they know what they're talking about because a lot of them have lived in institutions for their educations. They're about 40 years today, but when they were small children, they lived in the institution, and they didn't have the possibility of living active lives out in the community. They didn't even have the possibility of choosing what they wanted to eat. And that's pushing them and driving them for their fight for equal opportunities today. So ENIL issues, independent living as a human right. We're basing it now on Article 19. We've been claiming it for a long time, but now we have a backing with Article 19 in the Convention. Free our people now, close the institutions, or the Article 14 on liberty. Nobody. I was asked when we were at the Freedom Drive this year, we met with the Council of Europe, and one representative asked me, if I can honestly ask you, should anyone live in an institution? And I said, no. If everyone was given a choice, a real choice, no one would choose that. So we need to close the institutions today. I know there's only 4,000 people left in this country, and I know there's plans to institutions, and there are plans to get them out, and the sooner the better. So right to personal assistance, again, Article 19. Ratification of the UN Convention. I haven't changed the slide. There's now 19 countries who have ratified, so there's only 8 left. One is Ireland. Another one's Bulgaria. I visited Bulgaria a couple of weeks ago before the elections. We met the Ombudsman, and they assured me that they had plans to ratify before the end of the year. So I'm hoping they really stick to it. Accessibility and freedom of movement, Article 9 and 20, and representation of people with disability at all levels in all areas. We should be there at the stage of planning, not when everything's done and here it is. We need to plan because we are experts on our own and on our own needs. So nothing about us without us, the slogan many people have heard time and time again. This was from my visit in Bulgaria. It's a residents of an institution, a group of people that we sat and talked for a couple of hours on their situation. There's about 200 people living in this institution, people with disabilities. I have a lot of friends with disabilities. I love all my friends with disabilities as well as all my friends without disabilities. But when I'm sitting there and realize this is a place where I live with 200 people with disabilities, that's not very normal. It's not very normal. They wanted to get out of this place, of course, but there's a lack of housing and there's a lack of other things, services to provide for them. The one guy that's standing there, he came riding up on his mountain bike while we were talking. Then he joined the group and started talking. Everybody started laughing. I said, what did he say? He said, this place should be bombed. And I said, why does he say that? Who is he? Because I see him on his motor. Well, he lives here. He lives here. What's he live here for? I couldn't understand. But then I saw when he moved his hand that his hand it had stopped about the wrist, and he had small fingers here. So he's missing one hand. So his parents, as all these parents of these kids, they're not kids anymore, they're people between 30 and 40, I think. They were all abandoned as children and given away to live in an institution because they weren't going to make it in society. Several of them worked. This guy worked. 2 of the ladies worked at the library. The other guy worked at a computing company. And they go to work from their institution, and they come back to their institution. But there's no place for housing, so they can't get out. So the whole society, the services have been organized in a wrong way. They've taken people from all over the country, put them in one little society, and then that society doesn't have the possibility of providing the housing. If they had stayed, each person in their place, it would have been easier to accommodate these people within the society. Adolf Ratzke, one of the gurus here in Europe, talks about a definition on independent living, just to be ordinary people. That's all we are. We're just ordinary people that want to be loved and have our families and go to school, etc., etc. To have the same range of options and same degree of self-determination granted by non-disabled people. Riding the same bus every day, not every day, I don't go into town every day, but when I do go to town, I can't ride the bus that goes in front of my house, even though we have the EU directive. It's still not accessible. The day I was supposed to go, I'm a county council up where I live, in the middle of Sweden, and the first county council meeting my car broke down, so I wanted to take this bus, and they had told me it was now accessible, but when I went to get on it, it didn't work. Well, I had a strong assistant that day, so he pulled me in, but nobody else would have been able to do it. But this is the thing, being able to ride that bus, being able to go to the same schools, being able to have a family. This is independent living. So it's a philosophy, a movement, a basis for political action, and just being ordinary people. We have our basic beliefs and concepts and attitudes as a group, believing that it's self-autonomy, self-determination, that we should have equality in life, and self-respect. A movement starting back in the 60s, I won't go into that, but you can read a book called No Pity by Joseph Shapiro from 1993, which gives a good history background on the independent living movement, which I found quite interesting to read myself. So it's a basic for political action. We need to see new legislation, reforms in different countries to make sure that these people aren't going to live in institutions, or at least new children coming along won't have to do that, and that these people will soon be liberated. Choice, control, participation, and inclusion. The choice in Article 19, the choice of housing, the choice of services, choice of lifestyle, choice to have personal assistance if needed. But then the control, that we ourselves should be able to control this. So we need legislation or services where we can be in control. That I should be the one who can hire and fire the assistant if they're not working according to how I need my life to be led. Some people, like the people in the institution, being able to choose what you want to eat. But it should go further, being able to organize that support system the way you want it to live your life. I know coming over, I was explaining to my assistant with me that what I was going to talk about. And she was talking about her grandma, who's quite old. She needs some help. But then again, she wants to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning because she has 2 children with intellectual disabilities still living at home. They live on a farm. The home service can't come at 6 o'clock in the morning. That's too early. So the family has to abide and help this lady. So there should be a service that provides that even she can decide, I want to get up at 6 o'clock and make breakfast for my kids. Or another old lady that they had met recently, and when her home help came that morning, and she asked them, who's going to come this evening? And they couldn't answer. And she was very anxious because she needed to take her shower, and she really didn't want a guide to come, but she didn't know who was going to come. So it's being able to decide which sex is the person you want to help you and to assist you with the things you need to do, whether it's a home help service or whether it's a personal assistance service. Participation in society, active citizenship, in decision-making, and being full citizens. Inclusion, being included in society without this ideas of pity, oftentimes of how we're met with people looking at us as objects of pity. So universal design needs to be the basis for the policies that are going to be made so that they will be inclusive of all people in society. One more, just quickly, the whole convention is important for us, but some of the articles that we accentuate is Article 9 on accessibility, because if you can't get out there, then you're stuck already. But Article 14, liberty and security, the ones that you should be closing the institutions based on that one. There's a lot of violence and abuse in institution, it's proven. Article 19, independent living and personal assistance. 20, the freedom of movement. We have a lot of cases now. Some of the cases are students who want to take their personal assistance and travel abroad and study. It doesn't work. They can't go. We have people who have gotten jobs in Belgium, from a girl from Finland who got a job in Belgium. She couldn't go. She couldn't take her personal assistance with her. EU is supposed to be, a possibility of free movement, but it's not including us. We're not included in that. Article 24, inclusive education, and 27, unemployment. These are all important articles for the independent living movement. As I've talked about personal assistance a little bit, this is a picture also for the Freedom Drive this year. Peter's on the right. He's Peter Lambrechts, our regional coordinator for the West. He sits in Ghent. He gave quite a good speech on the effects of the cuts on people with disabilities now in Europe, which is one of our main concerns this year because it is starting to get heavy for people. Freya Haraldsdottir is on the left there. She's a young lady, 25 about, lives in Reykjavik. She just completed her master's. But it took her 8 years to fight for personal assistance. She gave a fantastic speech. We meet with the members of parliament. There was 200 of us and probably about 30 members in parliament that day. And she gave a fantastic speech about how her fight for freedom, her fight for human rights, meaning that she had to keep knocking on the door of the social department asking for personal assistance. She was tired of living at home, waiting for her mom to come home during the day to be able to go to the bathroom. She would have to wait hours, not knowing at what time she would get up because it would depend when the home help people came to wake her up, not knowing when she would be able to eat. Oftentimes she had to eat when other people ate, not necessarily when she was hungry. They were trying to convince her that she was a social burden and that she definitely had a price tag on her head and that she should be thankful for that she was getting the service she did from her family. But she realized that she's quite a fantastic person. She talked about to have a dream, that the speech, to have a dream, really affected her. She said she had a dream, she just wanted to get out there and to be in society. She concluded her speech by saying, societies do not structure themselves and money does not make decisions. Institutionalization, exclusion, oppression, dehumanizations, these are not natural parts of life. We need to change these, and everybody in this room and everyone has that responsibility. So, why new models of services? Old ones are based on assumed needs rather than personal needs, individual needs, not on individual life plans, on how a person wants to live. They're organized often for the employees and not for the people that they're serving. They need to be organized for us. We need to organize them the way we need them to be organized. Decisions are made by the organizations that are considered the experts rather than based on the people having the needs, who are the real experts on what they need as far as services are concerned. So we need new services to make sure that we can fulfill human rights, that we can have full participation and active citizenship with real choice and control. I was going, let's see, the four definitions that we think are important in independent living are the definition of independent living, personal assistance, deinstitutionalization, and community-based services. Because a lot of times our definitions are being hijacked by people. They're saying you have personal assistance in an institution. We don't really consider that personal assistance in an institution. So the definitions, if I can go backwards, for independent living, we're saying that it's a daily demonstration of human rights based disability policies. If we have good policy and demonstration of those policies, then we have access to independent living. It's possible through a combination of environmental and individual factors that allow for control with choice and decision to whom, where, and how to live. And this requires access and accessibility, access to public services, personal assistance, inclusive education, employment, and availability of technical aids. It requires accessibility to the built environment, the transport system, for example. Personal assistance, it's a tool for independent living, earmarked cash allocations. It should be based on the individual assessment, the individual needs, and that individual's life situation. In Sweden, we have a strong organization of our independent living movement. It's called YAG. It means I, but it also means, anyway, I won't go into that, but it's a group it's working toward people with intellectual disabilities and seeing that these people have personal assistance, can live at home in their own houses, and they have what they call a service garant, because they themselves can't make that decision, but through a service garant, they can live a life being free out in society like everybody else. And maybe Joe wants to go watch football and Emma wants to go knit, and they'll find the people, whatever it is, so they can do the things that they want to do in society and not necessarily go to a sheltered workshop or a sheltered place, which they don't really want to go to. I meet people in Sweden who are with intellectual department, when I talked with them, one guy I asked him, what do you do? He goes to a shelter workshop. He says, what do you do? And I told him about my job. He says, can I go to your job with you? Because it's really boring going to a job every day and just being with people with intellectual disabilities. I really don't like that anymore. And I could feel for him. I could feel for him because he wants also to be a part of a diverse society. Back to the definitions. Independent personal assistant needs to be consistent with the domestic labor market, meaning it shouldn't be low paid. It needs to be a job of status. And the disabled people need to have the right to recruit, to manage, and have the own choice of the employment model. In Sweden, through the legislation we have, we can choose to either have my own company, I don't have time for it, to you do it through a cooperative, which is I do through the Independent Living Cooperative. You could choose to administrate it through a personal assistance company, or you can keep it through your municipality. There's about 40% of the people that have it through the municipality still today. But it's a choice of deciding how do you want to do that. The allocation should cover the salaries, also performance costs, employment taxes, administration costs, and we feel it should include even peer support. Peer support for us is very important because that's how we get empowerment through the exchange of experience. Deinstitutionalization of political social process provides for the shift from the institution and even family care. You can have an institution living in your family. It's effective when the person in the institution actually has an opportunity to become a full citizen with control over his life, a choice of where he wants to live. This is through affordable, accessible housing in the community, access to public services, personal assistance, and peer support. Community-based services, again, political, social approach and policy measures for making all public services available and accessible. It should be in the mainstream settings, appropriate accommodations instead of building segregating systems. So you don't want residential institutions, you want houses. You don't want special schools, you want inclusive education. You don't want long-term care hospitals, you want health care in the home. Paratransport, you want accessible transport so you can ride the bus with everybody else. Instead of shelter jobs, you can use supported employment. This is a guy I met when I was in Spain a couple weeks ago. His name is Jose. He had a life, he said. He's been out of the institution for 8 months. He met some people in the independent living movement, and he saw that they were living lives. They were going to the pub, and they were having friends, and they were having life. And he says, hey, I want that too. And so through a friend, they were talking, so he moved in with one of the guys. And I'm not sure exactly how it's going to work. I'm not sure exactly how he's going to do his housing and how everything's going to work. But now he's so excited he has his life. And I think when there's a will, there's a way. I think he's going to make it. So what's he need? He needs his human rights, full citizenship, choice, and control. The last picture is from the 5th Freedom Drive. This is Alex. She's from Bulgaria. She was our youngest freedom driver, 15. She wants to believe in the future. And I wanted to believe in the future. Her mom's been her assistant. She said, I don't want to take my mom to town anymore. I want to go out and have fun with my friends. So they want personal assistance, and they're working on it. And that's why we need independent living now and good social models that are based and allow us to have such lives. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. You certainly painted the bridge back to our situation. I think the language, even the language of the Freedom Drive is very important because it resonates very clearly with the civil rights movement in the US and is, in a sense, the latest emanation of it. The slogan, institutions are not the solution, I think everybody accepts now. And it's more a case of how do we put in place the transitionary arrangements to ensure that community services and individualized services are satisfactory, to make sure that we're not simply replicating an institutionalized arrangement, even in an arrangement that looks closer to the community. I think the the phrase you said, I just want to be an ordinary person, or people with disabilities say, I just want to be an ordinary person, leading an ordinary life is incredibly important, because I sense that the overall theme of these 2 days is getting a life, essentially, and reverse engineering our services in order to enable people to get a life and live it for themselves. And you also said, we want a life in which we can love. And I think it's one of the famous advocates of change in this country, Mary Keeley down in Clare, who says, service providers, no matter how good they are, will never love you. But you got to create the space for people to develop the relationships in their own life to find their love. You also talked about choice, control, participation and inclusion, and what I got from that is you considered the issue of control to be critically important. And I think there's a very interesting overlap there in a trend or a tendency in our social services more generally, which is through the use of new technology to be personalizing those social services. I think we're going to see a lot more of that for a lot more people, not just for people with disabilities over the next 20 years, but devolving that control down and then making sure that systems respond appropriately is really one of the bulldozers, I think, for knocking away some of the obstacles, but as well as that for the reimagining of services to create space for people to get a life. You listed quite extensively some of the core articles and obligations in the UN Convention. I probably personally would have added to that Article 12 on the right of legal capacity to make decisions for yourself, which is a critically important one around the world as well as for us here in this country. I suppose the idea of organising services to meet people's not just needs but also desires to create a life for themselves was critically important. You talked about personal assistance as a tool for independent living. I like to think of it as not primarily a tool to maintain people's needs, but actually primarily a tool to build bridges for people into the life world and to give them added opportunities and expanded opportunities to create the life they want for themselves. Individual life situations and the right to manage things for yourselves is absolutely critically important. And changing community-based services to create the space for people with disabilities is also critically important. That's probably where we have a lot of challenges remaining actually throughout the world. And you ended up quite nicely with the 15-year-old who is saying she simply wants to believe in the future. And I think it's so critically important that she's only going to be able to believe in the future if she knows that those bridges are going to be put in place for her to get a life, which is why the service issue is so critically important.